is trying to give people autonomy, don't micromanage, manage outcomes. And if a company's doing all those things as a part of their ecosystem, then you have people that can get some reasonable amount of control over their lives and balance all of it.
Welcome to Aggie Legends, where we talk with founders, CEOs, and other successful Aggies about the lessons in leadership they've experienced throughout their careers. I'm your host, Ben Wiggins, Mays Business School MBA class of 18, and today we're here with Wayne Roberts, 85, namesake of the Wayne Roberts 85 building, which we are recording in today. Wayne, how's it going?
It's great. Howdy.
Yeah, howdy. Absolutely. Happy to have you here. So you are the retired president and CEO of Abrigo, and you have obviously seen and done a lot in your time here at A&M and post A&M, the winner of the Buck Wyrus Spirit Award, and spent some time in student government, 40-year career. Take us back to the beginning, if you would. Where does the Wayne Roberts journey begin?
Well, I almost didn't become an Aggie. So I guess it begins that A&M, it wasn't a planned step. I mean, I grew up in Austin, almost a Longhorn. Mm-hmm. I can say that now. Yeah, but I felt forced by everyone I knew in Austin to go to that school, and I wanted to kind of carve my own path. Okay. And so I just noticed that a lot of the folks I went to high school with, like the ones that were friends that I admired, it seemed like they were all going to A&M. Like, we've been brainwashed and everything about this place over in Austin. So I'm going to get in a truck, I'm going to go hang out with these folks and see what this is all about. And I fell in love with the place. So I had to, convince the family. And I was dating my future wife at the time, who's a Longhorn, who was a Longhorn. And her family still doesn't forgive me for that conversion. But yeah, so it was, I don't know, it was like an accidental start to the journey, but it was driven by, this place just oozes, culture and, the values of the university just really, just in the first visit, you just felt it from howdy. Back then you'd get howdy to death as you went across campus.
Sure.
But just, the way that everyone was friendly, everyone was there to serve you. Like it just oozed all those things. That fit me, that resonated, that started the journey. And it's one of the 2 or 3 best decisions of my life. So
what surprised you then once you were here? What subverted your expectations about being at Texas A&M?
Well, my first choice of major. So again, I'll probably talk about this, but I spent a lot of my life trying to do what other people wanted me to do.
Yeah.
A&M was kind of the first break from that. But I was a chemical engineering major to start here because that's what other people thought I should do. And organic chemistry, that's the first thing that got me. I think I was glad to make a C in that class, but that convinced me that maybe that's not what I want to do with the rest of my life. So I switched over to business.
Yeah, it's an ambitious choice. Certainly, you were a first generation college graduate as well. What was Thanksgiving like when you came home from school or whatever, and were hanging out with your fam?
That first year was interesting to say the least. It helped that we were doing pretty well back then against the Longhorns, but eventually, happy ending to the story is that everyone in the family basically became Aggies. So even Shannon's parents, who were big donors at UT and everything, they became huge fans of A&M. Yeah. So I'd like to think that through our stories and through the networks that we've impacted, we've converted a lot of people to really see what A&M is all about.
Yeah, a lot of senior leaders in corporate life spend their entire careers at one organization. You were a trailblazer and spent time with many different companies, starting in the pretty high pressure world of consulting. What did you learn along the way that inspired those moves?
Yeah, I'd like to say a lot of it was planned, but I think earlier in my life, I was doing a lot of things because other people thought that's what I should do. Yeah. So I started in consulting, what used to be one of the big 8 firms that became Accenture, and spent a good portion of my early career there. The first couple of years at those firms in the consulting, you're programming, and I hated it. I hated every minute of it, and I was not any good at it.
Yeah.
And so, eventually I started pursuing things that were a better fit for me. Mm-hmm. And I would say that that first third of my career, changed a couple different times. It was really just trying to seek something that I would get some happiness and fulfillment with, from a work standpoint. And so I was searching for that.
What was the biggest way that this developing worldview was challenged over the early part of your career?
One of the more impactful things for my career actually was a personal, crisis. And that was Shannon's first bout with brain cancer. Came out of the blue. We were in our late 20s, like the classic, we had done everything right up to that point, especially her. And, we were had early in our careers, bought our first house, talking about having a family. We had dated since high school, all those things, right? So you're sitting there going, I've done everything I'm supposed to do, and then this happens. And she was given a year or two to live at that point. Well, it in hindsight, it's like the best thing that ever happened to us. I know that sounds strange to say that, and I can say it in hindsight. At the time, it didn't feel that way, but it created the first inflection point on our careers, but also our personal relationship. And it taught us to kind of get in the moment. Again, start to focus on the things that you do best. To not take any other, all the things that sound trite and, put the motivational stuff you put on the wall. It's a shame that a crisis has to happen like that to kind of remind you of those kinds of things. But what I'm proud of is that we sustained it, okay? Because obviously she survived that. Yeah. She was in remission for a long time. We had two wonderful children. Yeah. Like I say this all the time, like I'm an ordinary guy that's had this extraordinary life. And that was an inflection point on the extraordinary part.
Absolutely. What lesson was the hardest for you to learn in early career, and what changed when you learned it?
One of the things I've struggled with my entire life is, being a pleaser, which sounds like a great thing, but it has a dark side in that you can often, and for those that might be listening to this podcast, if you have that kind of tendency, I want to give you the freedom and the encouragement to maybe try to put yourself first a little bit.
Yeah, say no.
And say no. And I think when I started, it wasn't so much me saying no, it was, really making some of my own decisions and then seeing some success from that. So success begats success kind of things. And I think very much realized that when I started just saying, look, I got to get myself in a position where I'm able to give my best every day. And it really started happening when I got to Dell and then especially at Rackspace. And you look at my career trajectory, I mean, it was slightly up and to the right, in that first 13 to 15 years, but it did a steep move up right after that. And it's no coincidence that it happened when you wouldn't think it would take me 15, 20 years to figure that out, but it did. And once I did, then I very much tried to get myself in that position and spent a lot of time trying to get other people in that position. One of my strengths is developer from a Gallup perspective. And so I'm always, looking at people and trying to figure out how to develop them and optimize what they're doing. Individualization is another strength, all those things. Once I understood that, I guess it was a way to put the language helped me figure it out. Like the voice that was over here on this shoulder and the voice on this one, like starting to listen to this one a little bit more. Once I started doing that, and I could actually put words to it and some science and some methodology to it, again, things just kind of took off. So, but it caused huge struggles in the first part. So anyone listening to this that is struggling with something like that, especially early in your career, maybe it's late in your career, still trying to figure this out, I would just encourage, exploring, understanding things like your strengths, look back on your career at times where you were highly engaged. Look at times where you were getting a lot of positive feedback, where you were generating some results that were, outsized results, or you're getting the kudos and all those kinds of things. Success leaves clues, and you go back if you go look at those clues.
That's good,
and it will help you discover the keys to success. And the move to Dell from Accenture to Dell was really the first true time that I picked a role for, I think, all the right reasons. And it put me in a position of doing things that I was really good at, and they were strengths of mine.
How'd that make you feel? Like, was there an immediate excitement kind of feeling like you had arrived?
Yeah. I noticed that things like, we all want, especially early in our career, we're trying to figure out how to get, promoted and get raises and all those kinds of things, right? You're on the ladder or the fast track. And I think I realized at that point that when you're doing things that you're really good at and that you love and you're highly engaged, that those things start coming. And you don't have to think about it as much. And then others around you are doing more of that kind of promotion of you versus you having to do the self-promotion. So I always say that, you get promoted when others are promoting you or pushing for your promotion, not because you are. So it just, I got in the right role. We were building out a new consulting organization at Dell that didn't have one. Mm-hmm. So, I'm a builder. I've got to be doing stuff where I'm building, people, teams, companies.
Yeah.
I need to be doing stuff that's growth oriented. So things that are like optimizing or stagnant or whatever. So you wouldn't think that this would be something I would struggle figuring out, but I did. And when you're like doing it, mm-hmm. That you suddenly realized, oh wow, this is the secret ingredient I've been looking for. Mm-hmm. And now it's happening. And oh wow, like I'm excited to get to work in the morning. I'm getting good feedback. We're growing. All these great things are happening. And he realized that it was really, it's not that I was working harder or anything like that. It was just starting to do the right things.
You had the initial excitement, and then the excitement starts to wear off and stuff starts to happen that you don't like as much. What were those moments?
They were definitely, and this was a pattern as well, not just at Dell, but at a couple different places. So when I'm not building and not in a growth kind of mindset or organization, bad signs. I mean, not every organization is like that, and some people are suited for optimizing and stuff like that. But that's not me. When I first started being a CEO, I'm not sure that was like my career goal, or I thought it was achievable, or anything like that. This is the point in time where I started thinking about, okay, like I want to be the person. I want to have the wheel. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. I don't want to be the co-pilot. I don't want to be in the back seat. At some point, I want the wheel, and I want to be the one accountable for these decisions. Because I want to be able to own those, and I'm very convicted on how this should be done. And so this period of time is when that conviction was really getting very, very strong. And the next change I made to go to Rackspace was based on that alignment of culture, the organization. I knew people that were working there. I pursued that job, and we moved to San Antonio to for that phase of my career. Yeah. And it was outside of Abrigo was the highlight of my professional career. It was like a second MBA.
You use the culture word. What is that to you, and what is it not?
To me, culture it's the fuel to the rocket engine of growing a successful company. Mm-hmm. It's the input that will lead ultimately to the outputs. So or foundation, however you want to think of it. And if you don't get that part right, you're never going to get the most out of a team or an organization if the foundational stuff is not right. And to me, the most important foundational piece of any organization, I don't care if it's a football team, something at church, a business, ultimately it is that this culture is healthy. And to me, culture is, it includes, the values of the organization and the behaviors and norms that are acceptable within that organization.
What were the core values that drove you, integrity or respect, or what was the culture that you tried to instill?
And with all respect to A&M and other organizations that have things like integrity, so did Enron on the wall. So it was very important to me that we not have like the same thing everyone else had. Yeah. I'm going to sound like a commercial for certain things like Gallup and Strengths or my former company Abrigo, but if you look at the walls of Abrigo, that was the values of that organization were very intentional. It's heart and soul. There are 5 values: love for others, speed to results,
very specific.
Okay? Own it, uncommon grit, and learn and grow. And so all 5 of those
you guys
values
are ahead in this respect too, because I see more companies and organizations doing that now, like the very specific wording, multiple words for a core value. Sorry, I cut you off. Okay. Keep going.
No, it was being very intentional about like not just saying grit as an example. Right. Plus, I had to get the acronym to work of heart and soul, but an uncommon level of grit. Yeah. That we were going to be the company that was composed of people that had a level of resiliency and resolve that you just did not see anyplace else. Okay, that if you worked here, you were gonna you were not gonna give up. You're never gonna give in. You're never gonna get outworked. If it comes to that. And so each of those values. The other thing I noticed in my career is sometimes the value would be on the wall, integrity or whatever. But the best example I have is at Rackspace, we had one of the values was treat each other like friends and family. Mm-hmm. And at one point, I ran global HR for Rackspace for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And some of the stuff that was coming to me was, conflict between teams. Okay. And I'd bring them in and okay, there's the value here of treat each other like friends and family. Why did you do what you did? Well, in my family, we're very direct. I confronted the person. I was very direct with them. The other person was offended by it. Yeah. Because in their family, they don't do those kinds of things. Mm. So it led to a relaunch of the values at Rackspace, where we actually went into the behaviors associated with those to make it very, very clear. When we say treat each other like friends and family, this is what we're talking about. So that was an epiphany. And so when I got to Abrigo, I was very, very adamant that not only we had values that fit us and that I had seen work in a bunch of different great organizations, but that they were further defined by the behaviors that we all stacked hands on, okay, and we agreed that these are the behaviors that we're going to exhibit. And in fact, it wasn't just me establishing these values. Mm-hmm. This was an effort across the entire company to stack hands on the values and the behaviors, where we went through a whole process where people had input into it, and then we did the whole debate, disagree, and then commit, and then boom, this is it now, we're stacking hands, this is what we're doing. We hire people based on values, we fired people based on values, we promoted people based on values. They were, to say it again, they were the heart and soul of the company.
The company experienced some huge growth during that time, congratulations, and that all happened while you were dealing with some pretty significant personal situations as well. What was that like?
Yeah, I look back now, and so you're referring to Shannon's kind of second bout with brain cancer, which coincided almost exactly with my tenure at Abrigo. It reoccurred after 20 years of remission, shortly after I became CEO. I think back now, I'm proud of that period of my life. I'm proud of, being able to be her primary caregiver. I'm proud of the example. And I say this with humility. The people that know me know this is coming from humility, but I'm darn proud of it. I look back now and I sometimes wonder how we did it, but I did it because we had just an amazing team. And I wanted to set a good example for the people in the company, because every one of us are going to have adversity. Hopefully it's not as extreme for most people as that, but we're going to have adversity, and it's going to impact our ability to, balance personal and professional lives. It's going to affect our work-life balance. It's going to affect our performance. It's going to affect all those things. And so I was very open. I mean, the company gave me permission through their compassion and caring, going back to the first value of heart, love for others. We loved each other as coworkers. We loved our customers. We loved our partners. And I felt that love the entire time. And it emboldened me. It gave me strength. And certainly my, personal faith and a bunch of other stuff also gave that strength. But when you're spending, 50% of your life at work, and sometimes more than that, depending on the what's going on, and you're able to be in a place where you're feeling that kind of support, that kind of love, you're working with folks that you love, and we had an amazing team. We had an absolutely amazing team. The leadership team is still there. I left. The president is now CEO, and Jay's doing a phenomenal job, and that team is still there. And I am super proud that 3 years later, that they are doing better than when I was there.
That's the ultimate sign of success.
My coach once said to me, the final act of leading is leaving. Yeah. And so from the very beginning, every one of these new changes, especially later in my career, from the very beginning, I was thinking about not being there. Not from a negative standpoint of I'm going to get fired someday or something like that, heaven forbid, but that we all have a last day at places. And I knew, I'd seen other people model great exits from companies. My CEO at Rackspace, who was a mentor, That's what he said when he left, was that we all have a last day. And this company, my last day is today because this company needs something different going forward. And that's how I felt about it. So very proud of it. Felt very, very supported, tried to model personal professional behavior and personal and professional resolve and grit and all those kinds of things, hoping that would serve as a good example for somebody in that company for the future.
You've been involved in a lot of other efforts to leave things better than you found them. Why is philanthropy in particular such an important part of your legacy?
Look, one of my great fears is that my time on earth would have not mattered. And I think I've been quoted on that. And it's been a driver of me, from an early age.
Same.
And I don't know why, but, this need to please was there early on, the need to serve others and the need to make sure that what I did mattered and I left a legacy, even, thinking about that as a young age. So again, sometimes our motivation is based out of fear. And I think when it comes to this is a fear-based, I'm just afraid I'm never doing enough, that I'm not leaving this place better than I found it, wherever it is, whether it's A&M or, my community, family, whatever.
I'm sorry that you feel that fear, but I will compliment you on all the beautiful things that you've been able to turn that to, Aggie Park. And it's just your legacy is all around us. To the rest of your legacy, what are the most important lessons in leadership you'd like to pass on to the next generation? And how do you twist them in such a way that as you're standing in front of a classroom full of young adults and people with, we all have short attention spans these days, but how do you make those compelling and take them beyond just the words that they've heard 1,000 times?
I think you start with something at 10,000 feet and something simple. I'm an Aggie. I can remember things on one hand kind of thing.
Yeah.
So look, I'd first start by pointing people to the wall in this building where, I said that, I want to serve others, to lead with integrity, and to never get outworked. And but the magic there is then peel that back a little bit. So it's, when you say serve others, what does that mean?
Yeah,
so when I'm talking to people, I usually will talk about okay, now let's peel that back and let's get down to ground level.
Sure.
And I think things even don't get outworked. Well, that's code or euphemism for grit, right?
Yeah.
I'm trying to translate all the things that I saw through my career that worked. And look, it's a wide variety of organizations and boards and nonprofits and everything that I've been involved with. But the same things work in all of those organizations. From a consulting organization to Trammell Crow, a commercial real estate company, to Dell, to Rackspace, to Accruent, to Abrigo, and then all of the other organizations. These were the common threads in successful people, successful stints for the company, and great results. And even more so when those results were sustainable.
You've alluded a couple of times to never getting outworked, but you have mentioned earlier on a few different points in this conversation how important the other things in life are to you. And clearly that's true. So what does never getting outworked look like to you?
Yeah, a couple of lessons learned. One, I think I alluded to earlier, that you work harder when you're more engaged in something, and it doesn't feel like work.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things there is to tell people, first of all, you got to get yourself in a position or job or a startup or whatever that you're passionate about, to the point that this doesn't feel like work to you, right? And so you don't look at the clock. You don't know how long I just did that. I noticed also earlier in the career when I was on in team type settings and we were working on a deadline or a project or something, and we all pounded to get the thing done, you didn't feel like that. Didn't feel like a lack of work-life balance, even though you might have worked a lot of hours.
Yeah.
So number one is just making sure that you're in an environment and doing things that you're passionate about to the greatest extent you can control that.
Yeah.
And I think later, the fact that I had more control over not only what I was doing, but what other people were doing, that became a big part of the driver for those values and the behaviors and everything. I get asked a lot, what is work-life balance, and how do you achieve that? I have found that, again, the work-life balance for me and for most people that I worked around it's when you have control of your schedule. It's not the number of hours that you work, but when you have the control and the flexibility and the autonomy in your schedule. So it led to all kinds of things like, look, we're not going to be the micromanagement firm here.
Right.
Okay, we're not going to micromanage people. We're going to focus on outcomes.
Yeah.
We're going to manage people to outcomes. I'll tell you one of the great positive things, if I could even say that, about the COVID phase for businesses where we went to remote like that. Okay. One day I sent my company home and we never came back. Right. We stayed remote.
Sure.
We've gone hybrid since then. But one of the great things that we learned there is, number one, we had a culture, and I say that word again, but we had those behaviors and values and we had trained managers to manage outcomes, and we very much focused on that. Like, I don't care within reason that you did that from like 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. Mm-hmm. I just know that it was due noon the next day, and I got it at 8 a.m.,
Sure.
And then you leave that to the person, because what I don't know as a CEO is that Ben his daughter has a dance recital that night, and he wants to go to that and doesn't want to miss it, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sending, if I'm micromanaging and dictating to that level, I'm going to drive people away from the company. But if I say that, or you set up an environment where you feel comfortable to say, look, I need to go to this thing tonight. I'll get it to you in the morning. Cool. That's great. That's fine.
Yeah.
So it's making sure that you're in a position to be where you're highly engaged. It's trying to give people autonomy. Don't micromanage. Manage outcomes. I mean, if a company's doing all those things as a part of their ecosystem, then you have people that can get some reasonable amount of control over their lives and balance all of it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think maybe it's one of the first for some people. I feel like it's one of the last for others, is giving yourself the autonomy too. And even when you have time to do the thing of thinking about, man, do I want to do it now or should I do it in the morning? I feel like there's so much power in that to say, all right, it's go time.
Yeah, you having control over when and how you do something. I think the other thing as leaders that I very much tried to do, hopefully I was successful, is modeling these things for people. I think when you're earlier in your career and you're watching leaders and C teams and stuff, and you're watching everything they do, right? It's not what they say, it's what they're doing a lot of times. And so I obviously became very, very aware of that, very conscious of it. And I would intentionally do certain things to like send a message or the value of stories, right? I mean, people start telling stories.
Yes.
And that is more powerful than any other thing I could put up on the wall. It's like, oh, wait, when Wayne goes on vacation, he checks out. Okay. Like I noticed, like whenever earlier in my career, every time I tried to take a vacation, like it wasn't a vacation because I was still working because somebody's pounding me with like, oh, I need this. How that felt. Like I want to focus on my family. I want to like recharge the notion of being able to kind of recharge your batteries.
Sure.
So when I got into positions of being able to try to model some of that stuff, I was very conscious of and making sure that people knew, like we're going to Cayman or whatever, and I'm out of pocket. So unless the company's burning down, Jay's got it, okay?
Yeah.
And if he really needs to get a hold of me, he can. But that kind of stuff sends such a powerful message to people.
Tell us a little more about where you are now then and what's next.
Well, I'm living a dream life, to be honest with you. Retiring 3 years ago, I joke, or it's not a joke. My kids did an over-under on how long I would last, that I would go back and do another one.
Oh, okay.
And I think 6 months was probably what they thought.
Oh, you're way over.
Yeah, so I won that bet.
Yeah.
And I'm not doing this just to win a bet. But I will tell you, I don't miss the day-to-day kind of drudgery, because even in the greatest of jobs, there's still some of that day-to-day stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm finding that I can focus on things where I can have that legacy and that impact, and I get a little more choice on that kind of stuff. So,
like what?
This, like being able to be in this great building and stuff. But I'm spending all of my time these days focused on legacy and impact.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't say all my time. I am remarried to a wonderful person, my best friend. Her name is Lane. And she's an Aggie. And so we are enjoying living at Bryan College Station and being a part of this great university and attending all these athletic events and giving back to Mays and a whole bunch of other parts of Texas A&M.
Absolutely.
And I would be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about our greatest legacy, and that's Jack and Katie. I think, and the relevance to this, conversation is that I know it sounds weird, but we kind of tried to parent them like through strengths, and we even did strengths as a family.
There's
one
your commercial,
time.
Gallup.
There you go. I should get a kickback from Gallup.
Yeah.
But I think the importance of that, and saying that, all kidding aside, is that the things you learn in your personal life go into your professional life, and sometimes professional back into personal.
Yeah.
And that journey, being told what to do, or feeling like I needed to please other people versus myself, and like that struggle early on in my life and career, and trying to figure that out, and noticing that, like, oh wow, I'm more engaged now, and I'm doing better, and all those things, right? So the kids came along around that time. Okay. And so I think that impacted how we, parented them. But one of the things that we were very focused on with the kids is that we wanted them to discover their strengths and to pursue the things that they were great at. Pure and simple. Super proud of the kids, and they're pursuing their passions.
Fantastic.
I plan to hit the big 100, someday. So there's still a third of that life left. I'm focused on what can I do in the next third.
Yeah.
It's back to that fear, like I haven't done enough. And so, what can I do? And it doesn't just have to be money, gifts, giving back, but just, your time and your treasure and your energy and expertise and stuff like that. So anytime you guys can get me in the classroom, anytime I can spend around students. Yeah. That's the thing I enjoy about the Texas A&M Foundation Board is we get a lot of access to students, and we can see the impact of all of those gifts from tens of thousands of Aggies who give small and large amounts, and the impact that has to the students that attend Texas A&M, some of whom couldn't do that unless they had that philanthropy and they had that generosity from our Aggies. So a little plug for the Aggie Network to continue to give back to Mays and the Flippin Institute and the Texas A&M Foundation.
Yeah, without question. Well, thank you so much, Wayne, for sharing your lessons in leadership today with us here on Aggie Legends.
My pleasure. Enjoyed it.
On behalf of Mays Business School, I'm Ben Wiggins. We hope you'll like and subscribe, and please leave a comment. Everything helps. Click the little bell so you never miss an episode. We're building a better world through business here at Mays Business School, and we thank you for being a part of it.